Modern Warfare Zombies is finally out, and I have played it for an embarrassingly long time over the last 3 days because it's just so good. So I wanted to put this video together just giving my review on it, my thoughts of it, my reactions to it, and being honest about the things that I absolutely love about it and the things I'm not so happy about. There's a few things I don't really like, and I'll talk about that towards the end of the video. I do want to point out that Activision did give me my copy of Modern Warfare 3 for free, and I know I say those two words far too similarly, but at no point did they ever ask me to say something nice about the game. They've never ever advised me to do anything other than give you my honest thoughts, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. So, what have I been doing in Modern Warfare Zombies so far? We've completed the first tier, we got up to the end and we did a story mission, and I'll talk about that later. We've also done a bunch of the Easter eggs. I think we were maybe the first people to unlock the vault and complete that kind of first proper Easter egg, even though there's no reward. But if you want to see a video on that, there's one on my channel from yesterday where you can see exactly how to do that. I did a full guide. And we've just been kind of exploring quite a lot. Now, I haven't rushed through the missions, and that's been kind of purposeful, just because I didn't want to burn through all the content and not have anything to do for the rest of the month. And I haven't really played solo. Pretty much all the time I've been on, I've been playing with either Flynn or Cobb or both of them, so I've been doing a lot of duos and trios. But as someone that went into this mode incredibly apprehensive, like you might have seen some of my streams and videos before it came out, after the Modern Warfare 3 came out, which I didn't like at all. I did a whole video about why I didn't like that at all. I thought it was absolutely terrible. I kind of expected this mode to be rushed and kind of half-assed and not make sense and not be very good. I think I was absolutely dead wrong. This mode is awesome, it's a huge amount of fun, and I think a lot of the problems that people have had with it is that they've gone into it with maybe the wrong expectations. They've expected it or wanted it to be something that it was never going to be, and if you come in looking at it as something new, I think you can have a lot of fun. So for people who wanted more round-based zombies, you know, the people who have been playing round-based zombies since World at War, and they wanted more of that, I think you were always going to be waiting for next year's game, for Treyarch's game, and this hasn't changed that. It's not like this has taken away some round-based zombies from you, it's just you still haven't got more of it. This is not really anything like that at all. And for people that wanted more DMZ, as I've said many times, I don't think DMZ was doing that well. I don't think it was on a great trajectory, like it didn't feel like it was getting better at all over the last few seasons, and I don't think this has really changed much about that. I think we would have just had a bit more of the stale DMZ if they'd carried on with that. This is something completely different. And while it is obviously built on the bones of DMZ, and I know Westy did that tweet where he pointed out that you can actually see the sort of Modern Warfare DMZ beta thing in the top corner, which is quite funny. But even though it's built on the bones of DMZ, I don't think it's really a continuation of that mode exactly. It's something a little bit different to that. It's like a twist on it, and I think that's a good thing. It's like taking some of the stuff that worked from it, just like how DMZ took some of the stuff that worked from Warzone, and then building it up in a slightly different way, taking it in a different direction. And it's ended up being a direction that I really enjoy. So let's get into the meat of the review. What is really, really good about this mode? The first thing, and I think the thing that is the most important and the thing that I was most worried about with it, is the amount of content. There is a ton of content in this mode already in the pre-season. So they've said that they're going to be bringing more stuff, there's going to be more missions, more story, more cinematic. I imagine we'll get things like new enemies and maybe new contract types and stuff like that as the seasons progress. But right away in the pre-season, there is a ton of stuff to do. So already you have 3 separate acts, and each act has about 6 or 7 tiers, I think, within that. And then each tier can have a bunch of different missions within that. So you kind of have a similar amount of content as DMZ had when it launched. And the missions kind of range from some that are a little bit boring. There's a lot of tutorial missions where it's just kind of, hey, you should go and pick up this upgrade, then kill a bunch of zombies with it. And then some of them are a little bit more interesting, like the story missions are really, really good. I really enjoyed the one that we did today at the end of the first act, kind of completing that first act. You get a proper story mission, there's actual like animated NPCs running around doing stuff, which is something that we didn't ever see in DMZ, so that's really cool. And you even get a cinematic at the end of it. I was kind of expecting us to get one cinematic in the pre-season, kind of if you completed all of the acts in it. But instead you get one at the end of each act, which is pretty cool. And I thought the cinematic was good. I didn't really care about the story that much up until then, and that's not saying something bad about the story. I just don't really care about Call of Duty stories that much. But that cinematic I thought was pretty good. I kind of want to see where it goes next. I thought it tied together some of the little scraps that I'd picked up along the way. I thought that was really cool. And on top of the missions, it's not like the missions are the only thing you can do. There's also just tons to explore. We found, like I said before, Easter eggs, we found bunkers. There's tons of different locations because it's the massive Warzone map rather than like a smaller map like you had in Outbreak. And it feels like there's a lot of hidden stuff dotted around. For these like first kind of, 20 hours or so that I've been playing, it feels like we're constantly discovering new stuff, and I know for a fact there's plenty of stuff that I've just never seen. Every now and then I tune into one of my friends' streams and they're doing something that I just haven't ever seen at all, which is really, really cool. I haven't even really got into trying all different kinds of weapons. We haven't spent very long in the hardest zone at all. We've done a little bit in there, but not that much. There's still a ton of upgrades that I haven't got. It just feels like there's a ton of content right now, and I think it's easily going to last until Season 1 begins for me, as someone that's probably going to be playing this every single day. If you're someone who maybe plays, a few hours a week, which I think the vast majority of the audience are, I think the content that's already in the game could last you for absolutely ages. To me, it kind of feels like there's a similar amount of stuff to do as there was in DMZ, which is awesome. I just didn't expect that at all. The second thing that I think is amazing, and another thing that I was really worried about, is the difficulty. I fully expected this to be too easy. Just before this launched, I went back to play a little bit of Black Ops Cold War with Cobb. We did the D-Machine Easter egg, we went into Outbreak and played a few rounds of that. And the biggest thing that stood out to me was just how incredibly easy those modes are, particularly Outbreak. Like, Outbreak is unbelievably easy for like the first hour that you're playing, and then it starts getting a little bit challenging. And that was just with two of us, we didn't even have a full team or anything like that. It just feels too easy. It's too easy to get powerful very quickly. It's too easy to just kind of take your time if you want and get completely overpowered, so then you're taking on any challenge. In order to make that game challenging, you have to be trying to speedrun. You have to be kind of pushing into things unprepared, and then it doesn't feel as much fun because the only real challenge comes from the fact that you're not doing any damage to the enemies. In MWZ, they've really done a good job of the challenge, where if you stay in the tier 1 area, it feels really easy still. Like, most of it's pretty simple. There's still a couple of things that can be quite threatening, like the monster, I won't spoil it for people, but the thing that's in the radiation, that's really, really challenging, and that's normally in the tier 1 area. And then some of the mercenary camps are really hard. Like, they seem like they do way more damage than the bots ever did in DMZ, and they feel like they kind of attack you in slightly more interesting ways. There's a lot of variety between the different kinds of soldier, and they actually act in different ways. They sometimes act a bit glitchy. I've seen snipers floating in the air and stuff like that. But they seem to be a real threat. Like, they're actually a little bit scary when you go past their camps. The zombies themselves, though, they're not a big deal. You can go around tier 1, you can get loads of the objectives done without any upgrades or anything, and you'll be absolutely fine. But then you go into tier 2, and there's a massive step up in difficulty. You start seeing loads more of the special zombies, like the Manglers, Maulers, Mimics, the Disciples, things like that. They are much more threatening and, quite difficult to take on a lot of the time. And then you also get some of the more difficult mercenaries, or bigger waves of mercenaries. When you do contracts in those areas, they're a lot more challenging. Sometimes there's like more objectives to complete, or a shorter time limit, or something like that. And then obviously if you go into tier 3, it just gets absolutely crazy, and the enemies are unbelievably difficult, and there's some huge monsters in there. It's just really, really difficult to get anything done. But there is an incentive to do it, because you get better rewards as you go in. You get kind of a quicker upgrade route if you push a little bit and you go to do contracts in the more difficult areas, and you go to loot up in the more difficult areas. And then you've always got that time limit that stops you from just taking your time like you could in Outbreak. Now, I do know that the time limit is quite controversial. Some people really don't like it because they liked being able to take their time. For me, in Zombies, it's always been a thing that's annoyed me a little bit, that games often take a very, very long time to get going. And the time limit stops that. Like, you've got just over an hour in MWZ to get everything done. Now, if you want to push into those more difficult areas, the idea is that you spend maybe one round just gathering up stuff, filling up your inventory with like perk cans, maybe picking up a load of like tools and crystals that you can then use to upgrade stuff in a future game. Then you exfil, and then you can go in fully stocked for the next one and immediately upgrade, saving a bunch of time, and then immediately get to the difficult content. And that's something I've always loved when Zombies lets you do, is when it lets you get to that challenging, difficult content without loads of faffing around first. And the game, even though you do have to do that kind of setup round, after you've played for a while, the game lets you get those upgrades much easier because you'll get schematics and things, which mean every couple of days, in the case of like the Pack-a-Punch things, or every few hours in the case of the perks, you'll be able to get some upgrades without having to find them in the world. You'll just have them there in your inventory. And I think that's an awesome solution to all of this. Like, you can choose how much challenge you want to take on, and it ranges from pretty easy, like pretty simple, but not completely brain dead, all the way up to incredibly challenging. And that means that if you feel like a challenge, you can go get it straight away. I just think that's awesome. The final positive thing I wanted to talk about in this video is something that I hadn't really thought about before, but it's a big thing that makes this much better than Vanguard Zombies ever was, and that's the enemy variety and the combat encounter variety. It feels like you're constantly taking on different kinds of threats. Like, you obviously have the normal types of zombies, and then sometimes you have armored zombies, but then mimics attack you in a slightly different way to other zombies. The fire dogs obviously leave the fire behind and explode, which causes other problems. You have those electric things in the nests. You've got maulers and manglers. You've got the abominations and things like that. They get, you know, absolutely terrifying at times. And then you also have the mercenaries. Some of them are driving around like the night. You've got snipers. You've got attack helicopters sometimes. It just feels like you're constantly getting in different kinds of fights. And that variety is super important. I think it makes the games much more interesting. And it means from moment to moment, you're not always doing the same thing. I do worry a little bit that there's a bunch of people right now who are trying to do the camo grind as quickly as possible, trying to level up guns as quickly as possible, and all they're doing is going to exfil and killing thousands of zombies for like an hour, and then jumping out and then jumping back in and doing the same thing over and over again. And I think they're going to get really bored, because that's a very, very boring thing to do. And while it's less efficient, you can actually level up guns pretty quickly just by kind of going around the world and getting stuff done and doing more interesting things, more fun things, which is kind of how we've been playing it. I really like the variety in it so far. It's kept it interesting all the way through. And all the time, I kind of can't wait to get back into it. Right now, I kind of wish I was playing a little bit more MWZ. So, on to the negatives, because I did want to talk about some negatives in this video too. First of all, the name. I wish it wasn't called MWZ. It's super awkward to say. Every time I type it, I kind of think of Modern Warzone and Doug, rather than thinking about the game. It just doesn't roll off the tongue like DMZ did. That sounds really good, DMZ. But like, MWZ is just really, really awkward. I kind of hope they think of a better name for it. Modern Warfare Zombies even is just like a bit of a mouthful. So, that's an unimportant point, but when you're making videos, it gets really annoying. The second one is just the bugs. Like, I get the impression this was maybe rushed out a little bit. I kind of get the impression this was maybe something that was meant to come later. I don't know this for sure, and I'm just basing this on pure speculation on my part. But I think what was meant to happen is this was meant to replace DMZ as part of the sort of free offering, and kind of this was going to build up towards Treyarch Zombies mode, and we were going to get it maybe in March next year, sometime around that. We were going to get this mode as a separate thing within Warzone. It would be free to play. That kind of makes sense with how it's built up, how it's kind of similar to DMZ and everything like that. And maybe instead, when they were doing everything they had to do to get Modern Warfare 3 out the door, they realized that multiplayer and campaign, there wasn't a lot to it. There wasn't a lot of new stuff. They needed something new, so they bundled this in with it. And that means that maybe it's a little bit buggier than it should be. Like, there's plenty of time as you're going around the map. You'll see like gaps in the terrain, stuff floating in the air. Enemies float through the terrain and float through the air and stuff like that all of the time. A ton of the missions, particularly some of the early missions, are really, really broken. And you can complete them. It's not as bad as DMZ was. Like DMZ, there were some missions where you just couldn't do them at all, and it would completely block your progress. In this, you can complete every mission. People have completed the whole thing. You know, I know Mr. Waffle Waffles has completed it all. I know Greg FPS has. So that's quite heartening to me to know that there's no bugs that stop your progress entirely. But there are some missions, particularly, as I say, early ones, which is a bit unfortunate, that are really difficult to complete. Like that one where you have to find the convoy. Everyone I know who's done that has like picked up one of the cards and it hasn't registered. Or they've destroyed a convoy and it hasn't worked because, you know, an enemy's fallen through the floor or something. And then the one where you have to like freeze the dogs is way more glitchy and a little bit more annoying than it should be. There just seems like a kind of lack of polish, and that's a little bit of a shame. And it does seem a little bit like this was rushed out. Although, as I was saying, it is in a better state than DMZ was when that launched. The other thing I don't really like about it is the way the lore is presented to you. As I said earlier, I think the story missions, really cool. Love the fact we get the cinematics and stuff like that. It seems a shame that we don't have like lots of lore dotted around. We don't have a separate page where you can go back and have all your lore organized maybe by character or chronologically, so you can kind of see what there is left to get and piece together the story. We had stuff like that in Black Ops Cold War, and it was super fun just kind of sitting back after you'd collected a bunch and listening to the whole story and trying to piece together everything. It feels like the story still isn't being presented in a very good way. And this was a problem with DMZ. Like DMZ, I feel like the story of DMZ, 99% of players didn't even know there was a story, or didn't know enough about kind of the different factions and stuff to piece together what was really going on in most of it. And it feels like that's kind of carried on over to this. That because there's just some audio logs dotted around, there's a bunch of radio messages that kind of come while you're doing stuff, while you're completing missions. It's super easy to miss loads of it. Often radio messages will play over each other. I find it very hard to kind of keep track of the story. There's also a bunch of characters, some of them from Black Ops Cold War, some of them from the Modern Warfare universe, and they're all kind of talking at different times. It's very hard to keep track of what's going on. And I'm sure there'll be some amazing videos from people like Ink Slasher or Mr. Waffle Waffles, and I'll be able to watch those and kind of learn what was going on when I was playing it. But as a player, it feels like I'm not really able to keep up with the story in the way I'd like to. So it'd be nice if they found a better way to deliver that content, even if it was just a page in the menu, so after missions, you can kind of see the story so far, and you could read back all of those voice transmissions that you get when you do missions. You could read back all of those audio logs that you pick up from the mercenary fortresses and things like that. That would be absolutely awesome, because right now, I kind of don't know what's going on outside of that cinematic that I watched at the end of Act 1. And finally, my final complaint about it, and I know it's something that's very controversial, and everyone who watches me probably knows that I think this anyway, but I think there should be PvP. I think there should be some kind of PvP. So far, I've barely had any interactions with other players in the game. You know, a couple of times I've been revived by people, or I've revived people. We've never really teamed up to go and take on a harder threat, because everyone's kind of doing their own missions, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. It just feels like it's very hard to have any kind of positive experiences with other players, and instead you just have no experiences with other players. You just kind of ignore them on the map, and sometimes it's annoying if they're taking a mission objective that you want or something like that. And there's so many downsides to having servers that work like this where there's a bunch of other players. It means you have to wait a little while to get into a game. It means that you can have connection problems with the server, you can't pause it. There's so many problems that are caused by having these big open worlds with a bunch of other players. And it feels like there's no real upside at the moment. The upside to me would be if maybe you could fight the enemies. And I've heard a couple of good ideas for how this could work. I was suggesting something like the Division's Dark Zones, where there'd be areas on the map that if you go into them, you know other players could fight you. But within those areas, maybe you would be able to like get better loot and stuff like that. Obviously, it's hard to work out how it would work. Like, what if a player was outside that? Would they be able to shoot someone inside? Or vice versa? Like, how would all that work? I've got no idea. I'm not a game designer, but I would like there to be some PvP like that. Also, the idea that maybe Tier 3 could have PvP enabled, so like you go into the most difficult part of the map, not only are you fighting the worst monsters, but you're also going to have to deal with other players who could potentially be taking your stuff. I think that could be a bit harsh for any missions that involve going into Tier 3, but it would make Tier 3 even scarier, and it would mean that people who wanted to PvP could all kind of have a target to try and congregate there and try and kind of dominate that area. Or someone came up with a good idea, it might have been Flynn actually, that when we're extracting, so when the radiation starts expanding and you need to get to exfil, then PvP's enabled. So it's kind of, if you don't want a PvP, make sure you get out before that timer finishes. But as soon as that timer goes, then all bets are off, every man for themselves, they can all fight each other. And then, you know, you can try and get some better loot by killing other players who are going for the final exfil. That could be super exciting too, although it would kind of get rid of that fun feeling of meeting up with a bunch of other teams at Final Exfil, which I've never had, to make it clear. You know, we've been to Final Exfil a couple of times, have never seen any other players there, but I'm guessing in some games it will happen, and I've heard from people who played at Treyarch, like it was really fun when they had a bunch of teams all going to Final Exfil. But yeah, I just wish that they'd put some kind of PvP in, because I think it would make for sort of more fun narratives, make for some interesting kind of experiences with other players, and maybe add a little bit to the replayability. Right now, it feels like there's a bunch of content in the game, but eventually we're going to get to the end of that content. We're going to be able to play through it faster than they can make it and release it, and that means at some point we're going to run out of stuff to do. And without PvP, that's the point where maybe it will get a little bit less interesting. But let me know in the comments what you think. So far, I have to say, I'm having an absolutely amazing time, really enjoying the game. It's so much better than I expected, and I'm just really happy that I've got something new that I'm excited to play. I'm excited to get online, play and stream and make content for. That's absolutely awesome. So let me know in the comments what you think. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one. Goodbye.